We have heard a lot of talk about tort reform this year. Changes pushed by the governor cleared the Senate and are now in the House. But does any of this really impact you? 11Alive News senior investigator Rebecca Lindstrom joining us now. And Rebecca, you say it's all about rates, whether you're getting behind the wheel of a car or trying to take out a loan to buy a house.
Well, that's right, because when we say that phrase tort reform, a lot of people just tune out. So we wanted to take this discussion to really where the biggest impact would be, because most of us are not going to end up in court after a car crash, and hopefully we're not going to leave a doctor's office worse off than when we went in. So the most direct impact we would have from all of this is our wallet. I am talking about how much we have to pay each month to get that legally mandated auto insurance or the homeowner's insurance required by our mortgage lender. But what is tort reform? That term is getting used a lot. So simply put, tort reform is the changes to our legal process to reduce the number and the cost of civil lawsuits. A lot of states have passed some form of tort reform, but as you can see by that definition, it doesn't really specify how those states are doing it. And that means that it's really hard to draw those direct comparisons between what one state has done. Will that be the impact that might play out here in Georgia? It could give us some ideas, but it's really hard to make those apples to apples.
And this really is a big issue. So break down for me some of the way that lawmakers are trying to get tort reform.
The proposed bill has a lot in it, so we're going to talk about just a few of those. It would change what could be entered into evidence, such as medical statements. Right now, attorneys can show what a treatment would have cost if the person injured had to pay full price. But this bill would say, if you're going to show that, then you need to show what they actually paid, which we know is often a lot less. It would allow defense attorneys to tell jurors whether you were wearing a seatbelt when you got in an accident. Right now, that is not allowed. The idea there is that if you had worn your seatbelt, your injuries might not have been as severe, and they would say their client shouldn't be responsible for your bad decision. It could also change the way attorneys talk to jurors in their closing arguments. If the defendant is found guilty, it would limit how the attorney can talk about payments for things like pain and suffering. It is essentially aimed at trying to get them to stop planting seeds for an enormous payout to compensate the victim for what has happened to them. And the proposed bill would limit who can sue a property owner for negligent security. That's, again, a bunch of big terms, but an example of that might be trying to sue the owner of a gas station because you got robbed while pumping gas. It also limits who can fund a lawsuit, and apparently there is a way under law right now that an attorney could double dip, like essentially get paid twice for the same case. This would actually stop that.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting. I think a lot of folks probably didn't know that. So what does any of this, again, bringing this back to people watching, what does any of this have to do with our insurance premiums?
The insurance industry says too often they just don't get a fair shake in court, and that Georgia's laws are the reason they've had to pay some pretty big jury awards. When those jury awards are more than $10 million, they are kind of in the industry called nuclear verdicts. According to a report by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce from 2013 to 2022, Georgia had 64 nuclear verdicts. That makes us tied with Illinois for the fifth highest number of cases with a jury award over $10 million. And many of those verdicts do get reduced on appeal. There are certainly people, though, who would argue companies did something really wrong for a jury to order them to pay such a large award. So if we make this decision, if lawmakers make these changes, I think the big question is, what is the community getting in return? And the biggest thing I could come up with is reduced premiums. Here's what we found out, though, about that.
We're seeing a legal system that is being abused by trial lawyers.
That's James Beal. He supports tort reform, and so does the state insurance commissioner, John King. He says insurance companies are losing money in Georgia, and the cost is passed on to you, the consumer.
Every package you receive, there's an additional cost for the coverage of insurance that required that package to be moved.
That's King testifying at the Capitol. We had questions about the research he gave lawmakers defending tort reform, but he declined repeated requests to sit down and talk with us, or even answer our questions in writing. But here's his response to lawmakers who asked, will tort reform save us money?
Well, can you guarantee that the rates will drop? I can't guarantee that.
Joanne Dorshore has a more definitive answer.
Oh, our research finds that no, rates never come down when you pass these kinds of laws.
She says the Center for Justice and Democracy has studied the issue for more than 40 years.
We compared states that passed tort reform and states that didn't and saw basically no difference.
A lot of other research says the same thing. But then came Florida.
The major companies who provide auto insurance in the state of Florida are also going to be providing premium decreases for 2025.
Florida says it has seen prices drop on homeowner and car insurance after passing limits on lawsuits.
They're seeing is nearly a 6% reduction in insurance premiums. They have 11 new carriers coming into the state.
But to your knowledge, Florida is the only state that has been able to show that kind of data.
We're in a different time, and maybe in the past when other tort reform measures have passed in other states, they didn't think about trying to gather this data.
There is no set definition on what tort reform means, so comparisons are hard. But Doroshow says the industry is playing a financial shell game.
Insurers can hide data that would disprove their position, but politicians never demand to see that data.
Again, after 3 days of reading reports, more time listening to legislative hearings, and interviewing people close to the subject, the answer I came up with: tort reform might help some businesses get insurance, but there is no guarantee it will save the average consumer like you or me money on our car or homeowner's policy. Now, I will say every single insurance category could have a different answer. I've seen more data that could suggest it might help our insurance premiums for healthcare. But when it comes to kind of what we're discussing right now, homeowners, car insurance, there just isn't a lot of data to support that it's going to make a big difference.
So does that mean we shouldn't do it?
There are people who say, regardless of whether this impacts our rates at all, we should do some of these things because legal reforms just make sense and should happen. And we have to remember, insurance is a product of a private company that is sold, but it is required by the government to have for things like driving. Many homeowners need to get it to get a mortgage, and businesses certainly must carry it, or certain levels of coverage, just so that they can be able to operate. So even if it doesn't save us money, we need these insurers to be here. Yeah. And therefore, I mean, on some level, we've got to do what they're going to stick around to participate with.
Yeah, so even critics of the bill admit insurance costs a lot. We all know that, and some people can't get it. So if tort reform isn't the answer, what is?
I think they would say, or at least the people I've talked to, accountability. The state's own studies, Georgia's own studies, showed more people are turning to lawyers when they're injured, and that when they do, they tend to get paid more. So are personal injury lawyers bullying the system, or are insurers forcing people down that path because they're not honoring their policies? And that's where they say really getting into these numbers, getting into the data and getting access to it could help insurance commissioners like here in Georgia sort that out, and then maybe add some more accountability into the equation.
Thank you so much for walking us through this issue, and thank all of you for joining us. You can find more conversations like this taking us inside the investigation on 11Alive Plus. And we want to remind everyone that if you have a tip for Rebecca, or if you want 11Alive Investigates to look into something, you can always reach us by calling us at the number on your screen. It's 404-873-9111. You can also email us at investigates@11alive.com. Thanks for joining us for Inside 11Alive News Investigates. We'll see you next time.